Good morning. We come in our daily Bible reading to Revelation chapter 18. And what we find in this chapter is that all of those forecasts, all of those prophecies, all of the waiting is going to come into fruition when God decides it's time. When you think about Revelation, of course, we recognize that we have Rome as the reigning power in the world. And Christians were being martyred, not just because they were Christians, but because they would refuse to worship Caesar. Now, Christianity would cause them to recognize that we serve a king not of this world, a Lord, a God, a Master, and we're part of a kingdom that will outlast any and all of this world's kingdoms that stand as the brightest, tallest, and strongest. They will fall when compared to the glory of God and when God decides their time is up. But as you think about Revelation chapter 18, we also have to remember the context of Revelation is not just that there are Christians who are worshiping Jesus the Christ, but that Rome would consider this a threat because, after all, Rome considered themselves what? The preeminent power. They decided that they didn't need God. They were strong. They were wealthy. They were mighty. They were powerful. And so anyone who would be viewed otherwise is a threat. In Revelation chapter 18, it's very clear that God doesn't find the kingdoms of this men to be any kind of threat. Read with me in Revelation chapter 18 in verse 1. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living." Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues, for her sins are reaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her." You recognize Rome, like the kingdoms in the Old Testament, for example, in Isaiah, whether it be about Assyria or Babylon themselves, not symbolically Babylon, but actually Babylon, or in other nations like Edom, they would recognize themselves as a power, and they would say, "We are strong, we are powerful, we are mighty." And they would say, "We are alone are the power." You see, this is Rome's problem. When you look at chapter 18, verse 7 and 8, notice the way that they're described. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury. And then also in her heart. This is a key passage here. She says, "I sit as a queen. I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see." You see, that is the arrogance of the position of the unrighteous who say, "I am benefiting. I'm doing well. I am doing great. I am in need of nothing, in need of no one." We think about a widow, particularly in Bible times. God shows a particular concern for both orphans and widows. Why? Because they were particularly at risk and reliant upon others to take care of them. You see, this is Rome's problem. This is an arrogance problem that's not unique to them. Babylon before them, Assyria before them. You recognize that this is what men do. We live in this world, we get preoccupied with it, and we build ourselves up in wealth and riches. And we say, "I have no need of God." But Rome took it to another level, didn't they? Not only with their success, not only with their military might, but also with their understanding of what it means to worship and to worship Caesar. This would be a direct threat or a direct opposition to God. And of course, we know in the sight of God, this is no threat. But it is opposition that would make Christians have to decide, do I take the mark of the beast and enjoy the pleasures of this life? Or do I trust the seal of God on my forehead? When you go back to the beginning verses, Verse 2 stands out. "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." And remember, this chapter, like the rest of Revelation, is written in figurative language. A Christian wouldn't be safe walking around with a message that says, "Fallen is Rome. Rome is going to fall." They would immediately be killed for such a treason. But fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Certainly a callback to a mighty power that God was able to put an end to. But notice in verse 3, this is the other theme of this chapter. It's not just Rome is going to be punished, but also the others who participated. Verse 3, "For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living." And you see, Rome itself and its leaders were corrupted, and they were evil, and God's going to punish them for that. But so many people went along with it, and why? Verse 3, because it was convenient, and it benefited them in a temporal way. And so as we recognize in the rest of chapter 18, what we're going to see is God is going to judge Rome, yes, the great power, the Babylon the Great. He's also going to judge those who have rejected him and chosen to serve the beast, to take the mark, to learn from and to worship the altar of Rome rather than the one true and living God. Read with me in verse 9 that theme. And the kings of earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots and slaves, that is, human souls. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud, Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors, and all whose trade is on the sea stood far off and cried out, as they saw the smoke of her burning, What city was like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. For in a single hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and musicians, of flute players and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. And a craftsman of any craft will be found in you no more. And the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all who have been slain on earth. And so as we recognize that this is a terrifying chapter of judgment, that God is going to judge Rome, and he's going to judge those who chose to ally themselves with her. And that's one abstract lesson we need to take from Revelation 18 is it's one thing to not be a terrible sinner, to recognize as Christians that we were bought with a price and to say, I'm not going to live that life of sin anymore. But it's also crucial from the biblical narrative in the Old and New Testament alike, and yes, in Revelation chapter 18, to not ally ourselves with sin or those who are doing it. It will corrupt us. We will get our focus and our mission distracted. You notice it's not just Rome who's going to be punished. In verse 9, it's the kings of the earth. In verse 11, the merchants of the earth. And also in verse 17, all shipmasters and seafaring men. Now, here's a really interesting question. Why were they so concerned about Rome's destruction? Well, really, there's two answers. One of them is they are worried about, well, judgment. Verse 10, they will stand far off in fear of her torment. In verse 15, they will stand far off in fear of her torment. And so you see this idea of being afraid of what's happening, whether because they think it's going to come to them or because they can't believe that mighty Rome will be punished and devastated. What power might it be to topple the great power that is Rome? But notice something also the shipmasters say, and they say, well, what city was like the great city? They think this is it. But also, verse 19, alas for the great city where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. They don't love Rome. They love what Rome did for them. They love the luxurious life they could have, the money, the power, the esteem. They loved what Rome did for them, how it benefited them. And we recognize that sin has that allure to us today. It's not that we just want to sin and violate God's will, but it's that we want something that obeying God's will won't bring us in the short term. We have to remember that judgment is coming. There is only one victor in this chapter aside from God. From a fleshly standpoint, it's not Rome, it's not the kings of the earth, it's not the merchants, it's not the shipmasters. Notice the phrase is found twice. In verse 20 is the first. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Remember, the Christians were crying out, O God, O Lord our God, how long until you avenge our blood? Well, God has a plan. He's made a promise, and he will see it through. And again, in verse 24, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who have been slain on earth. Rome was guilty. They had punished the Christians. You see, sin has no tolerance or love. It only takes. It takes, and it takes until God punishes all who are involved. But Christians, no matter what sin offers us, no matter what this world tries to take from us, Christians have a hope. We have a blessing because our God is in control and our God reigns. And so we can celebrate when there is judgment, not that we want others to be put to the death or to suffer, but that good will win, that God will win, and his kingdom will reign supreme. The question today is, which kingdom am I a part of? Hope you join us tomorrow as we study Revelation chapter 19.